All right, so thank you everyone for being here. Today we're gonna chat about German natural wine 101. And I was laughing when I was tasting through these right before this because I also realized that all these bottles are screw tops except for the sparkling. So it's also like light, fresh, fun German natural wine 101 would be another way I would describe this. So the way that I would like to run this is you guys are all in here, and this is going to live on too because a lot of people in the club have at least 1 to 3 of these wines in December. But feel free to, if you have questions or thoughts about the wines as we go, feel free to chime in, whether through chat or you can just mention it. We shouldn't be a huge group here, so it wouldn't be problematic if you do want to chime in just as we go through these slides. So without further ado, we can start here. We're first of all really excited to be partnering with Wines of Germany to bring these wines to you. So thanks to y'all for helping us secure these wines and get them both into the club and into this really cool box that we have for the month of December. So I am Holly. I am the founder of Misa Natural Wine, and we are purveyors of natural wine online as a wine club and an e-commerce platform. And if you do tag us in anything today, please use the handles of misa.wine or German Wine USA for Instagram. And then there's a few hashtags, whoops, you can use as well. How do I go back? Back. Oh, I guess it's fine. All right, so wait. Sorry, guys, 1 second. This is not presenting the way I needed to. So first, we're going to just talk a little bit about German wine in general. And then from there, we're going to discuss a bit about German natural winemaking, trends we're seeing there, regions. And then in the box, we have 5 different wines that I will taste through, and you either have all of them, just 1 or 2. You can let us know which ones you're trying. And we're going to start from what was considered lightest to heaviest through each of these regions. And then in the end, happy to take some questions, discuss German wine in general, and we can go from there. So the very first one we're going to start with is German wine overview. So Germany, you can see, has a very specific concentration where most of their wines are coming from. And we'll talk a little bit about who's producing the most wine after this, but you can see that the majority of it is kind of in the southwest region of Germany. And as a winemaking region, it's very well known for white wines, and we'll look at that breakdown in a moment. But when you normally think of German wines, you're traditionally thinking of Rieslings, and we're definitely going to try that because that is something that they're making a lot of, and you can find it across all of Germany. But the reason that they're normally famous for more white wines is that they do have this cooler climate. And on a personal level, I just really love the German, like basically the way that their climate is, because it actually allows a lot of the wines to be crisper, lighter. Also, you'll know that there's a lot of sweeter wines there, and that has to do with it being a bit cooler of a place, which means that the grapes may not reach full ripeness, might have more sugar in them. But that's not always how it is. And you'll see all of the wines that we're going to be trying today are all dry. So none of them are going to be in any of the higher levels of sugar that, if you've taken wine classes, are very fun and funny to say. There's, Trocken, which is what we'll have today. Then there's Kabinett, Spätlese, Auslese, Beerenauslese, Trockenbeerenauslese. There's a lot of different levels of sugar there. I feel like they've really have one of the best cultures for that. And then they have a little bit of less sun, as you might imagine, than some of their more Mediterranean counterparts, which again allows for it to have some of that brighter acidity. And they do have quite a bit of rain, which can be a little bit tricky for natural winemaking, but we'll get to that in a moment. And they also have been making wines for over 2,000 years. They have a lot of grapes that are native to Germany. And it's just a really interesting, it's really interesting to look at Germany and the way that they're making their wines, because each of these regions, as you can see in here, are really close to each other, and yet they all have very different styles of winemaking, different types of wines that they normally produce. And I don't have like a map in here of what the actual like landscape looks like, but there's also, you know, some of them are more flat, some of them are more hilled, and that really does create some nuances as well. So next, we can take a look here. So from what we just looked at, you can see the different places where they're making wines, and this is the volume. So the Rheinhessen, which we're going to be trying a wine from a little bit later, is where they're making the majority of their wines, and that is where the majority of the bulk wine is coming from. But also, we'll see, a very popular destination for natural wines. Then we have the Pfalz, which has the second most. And what I also found really interesting, if you do drink German wines often, the wines that you normally see on the shelves, or traditionally the regions that you hear of, are the Mosel, which has a good amount, and then the Rheingau, which is, you know, so small that you have to actually push it off to the side to write about it. So it's interesting to kind of see where the majority of it's coming from versus where the majority of the press or the discussions about German wines are coming from. So that's a bit about the volume of grapes and wine coming out of it. And then as far as the breakdown of styles, or sorry, types, so Riesling is of course the king in Germany. They make the most Riesling of anywhere in the world. And there's definitely more white wine coming out of Germany than red. And we're going to be trying almost all of the grapes that are on this chart, which is pretty cool because we have some nice red blends. So we hit on almost all of these today. And the 64% is actually dry, which I found interesting because it has, like, Germany generally has a idea of people saying, oh, Riesling, I'm not sure about that, it's sweet. But the majority of their wine is actually dry, though I would say compared to other countries, 64% is probably a bit lower. So they really do have a pretty good segment of the market of sweet wines are German. So that is a pretty good overview of their styles. Also, we'll note, and we'll talk about a little bit later with some of these grapes, that as you may know, many different countries have different names for the grapes. So for example, like Spätburgunder is Pinot Noir. So as we walk through this, I'll kind of tell you, like, that's this grape, which also might be known, you might know it otherwise as Pinot Noir. So if you think you haven't heard of one of these grapes before, you actually may have. It's just has a different name than what they call it in Germany. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in. Or Suzanne, I don't have the thing up, so if anyone writes stuff in, you can also just let me know as we go. So talking about natural wine in Germany, it's a little bit tough to get data on exactly what's going on with natural wine because the definitions are quite loose. France is working on getting a tighter one, but it's really tricky to know exactly who is and is not because everyone's definition of what natural wine is different. And by our definition, I'll at least just start there because I think that's an easy way to kind of know what we would be tasting. So our definition is nothing added, nothing taken out. So the goal is to have the least amount of sulfur added or other additives in the wines. And typically all the wines we'll see are, for the most part, unfined and unfiltered. So if you've also heard of like vegan wine, the reason that some wine isn't vegan is because they'll use things like fish bladders or egg whites to fine the wine and get all the particles out of it. So none of the producers that we'll be looking at today participate in that process. For the most part, they're not fining, not filtering, adding the minimal amount of sulfur to keep their wines still clean. I will say that one thing I do love about natural wines from Germany is that they are some of the cleanest producers of natural winemakers out there, because it's really hard to take grapes that you're not allowed to do anything with and just still have them produce like something that doesn't have any flaws at all. And I feel like it's not at all surprising that the Germans would be really good at that, and ensuring that they're very precise in the way that they do their winemaking so that it doesn't come out mousy or have any of the other things that are not quite as nice that we don't really like to taste in our natural wines. So these are all really clean and delicious, and I'm excited to kind of explore them a bit further. But before we jump into the first grape, so just a couple of numbers that I was actually able to get on natural wine in Germany. There's about 24 prominent producers that I personally know of there that I've either seen at events or talked with importers that we know and trust as natural wine importers. And that number really does grow each year. Pretty much, as you guys might think about European winemakers, a lot of them are inheriting their vineyards from their parents, and we'll see a couple of those with our producers today. So as they're inheriting them from their parents, they are converting them, which takes a bit of time. So each year we're seeing more of them moving towards organic or biodynamic production. And from there, little by little, they're basically converting them, and it takes at least a few years, normally 5+ years, before they'll actually start marketing and selling them in any capacity that we would know about them in the US. So it's definitely growing, and just looking at the numbers of like who attended raw wine from year to year, there's been like a saying that like German natural winemakers like are behind in numbers compared to their size, but I think that we're going to see that grow really soon, because I think that they're slower to enter the market. They're very cautious and careful about the way that they're making their wines. And all the ones that Nick and I have tried when we were in Spain that haven't even made it to the US yet, I think that we'll start to see the category growing a lot here soon. And yeah, so, and just generally, just because you're biodynamic doesn't mean it's natural wine, but another thing that Germany has going for it is that it does have the 4th highest number of Demeter certified wines. And one of the wines that we'll try today also has that designation. So I'll chat a little bit about biodynamics at that point, but that's what our fun little pictures are here, is to just kind of look at the idea of sustainability in Germany in winemaking. So you obviously aren't spraying things on your vines. You're letting the vines do what they want, creating cover crops, maybe having animals like sheep coming in to do some of your pruning, probably after the grapes are picked. Otherwise, they might take the grapes. And this is a nice secondary example too of just generally like how important sustainability is to Germans. So the power that they're using is wind powered, and it's just a really logical pairing to think about Germans and their mentality and their philosophy as people, and that going really nicely in pairing with making wines naturally. All right, so who's ready to drink? So the first one we're going to talk about is Riesling, because that is the #1 grape of Germany, and there's no way that we could do a class like this without talking about Riesling. So I love this wine because I think it is the perfect example.
Marcus, do you want to hear any of this?
Hey, Mom, we can hear you. Mom.
Oh,
that's my mom. So we love to use this wine as an example of when someone really likes, or sorry, someone really does not like Riesling and maybe is more of like a Sauvignon Blanc fan, maybe like my mom. This wine has a ton of acidity to it, and it's basically like a really great example of the Trocken style, or the very dry style of winemaking with Riesling. So if you guys have it, I think this one was in our 12 bottle club for this month, or if you bought the box, you can try it. So this is from the Brand Brothers. And I'll let you guys try it and actually play this fun little video. Since I couldn't have any of the winemakers on today, there's a couple that had some nice videos explaining what they were doing. So I wanted to start with that, and then we can also look at the winemaking. Let me introduce you to the Brand Brothers.
Hey, Holly, we don't have the volume.
Oh, hang on.
We don't have the volume.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you guys don't have the audio. I don't know how to make that happen. Okay, well, at least you can read what they're saying. So that's the Brand Brothers. Sorry, I wish someone would have told me earlier you guys don't have the audio. How do I get back out? As you can tell, they're basically two young brothers that inherited their land from their parents. And as they were saying on the video, they initially had, their parents had, great-grandparents had started with the farming where they had animals roaming around and they were doing everything completely naturally. Then when chemicals and everything were introduced about, I think it was like 25, 30 years ago or 40 years ago there, they stopped doing any farming, just started focusing on mass production. Their parents' brand, parents' brand. And after they passed on the farm to Jonas and his brother, they basically reverted everything back to how it had been before. So they're now doing everything completely naturally again. It took them a few years to revitalize those vines that they were using, and then they've become really popular in Germany for the pet nat style. But I think that this version of their Riesling is a really great example of what Riesling can be. So the two of them make some really great stuff. They're very experimental. They have a ton of different types of wines, but I love this one because it's a liter bottle. And so I think it's a really fun one for you to kind of have around this time of year when you may or may not have, hopefully you have some family around, but maybe not a ton. And it's the type that, again, like I said, is just kind of a wine that can convert someone that might be into really acidic wines and not thinking they like Riesling, and showing them what Riesling really can be. I love both styles of Riesling when it's more petrol and has more of those traditional notes, but this is a perfect example of how fresh and acidic a Riesling can be. So if you guys do have it, you can try it. It's very dry. It does have a few floral notes to it, but for the most part, I would say that it has really gripping acidity. Like if I was going to eat something with it, I would love to have maybe sushi or a salad. Like this is the perfect type of easy drinking wine that you could drink by itself or put it with something that may not normally go with wine. Anyone have any other thoughts on this wine?
This is Steven here. Hi, everyone. I'm from Weingut, Germany. I wanted to just chime in. Thank you, Holly, for featuring this wine. I really love it. One of the fun things about this producer, I don't know how many New Yorkers we have on the Zoom today, but I don't know if anyone's been to Mission Chinese or Pinch in New York City, and I think it's sort of Chinatown-esque, but this is their number one. It's a huge, huge, massive, like 200 table Chinese restaurant, fantastic food. And then this is their number one most ordered wine on their list. And so this specific bottling is also available. They call it Pinch by Brand, and to support the restaurant community and restaurant workers fund. So a great story here, a producer who's really involved in the market, and a really great wine, I think, especially with spicier cuisines or sushi, as you mentioned, really delicious.
That's awesome. I had no idea that they were doing that. I knew that they came, you've seen they're young and fun. I knew they came to New York fairly often and they love to do the wine shows, but that's amazing that they did a special bottling for that.
Yeah, it's really fabulous. I love this wine.
All right, so it was actually really tough for me to decide the way to run this tasting. It was very clear that this Riesling needed to come first, but I think that with the next two, if you do have the wines in front of you, it'll be interesting to see which one you think should have come second, because the other two wines that we have next are a light orange. So we're going to do this one next, the Muller. And then we have a sparkling rosé. So between the two, it was a little tough to decide, but the Rosé, as you'll see, is a little savory. So we're going to start next with the Muller from the, and my German's not the best, so I'm not sure if I'll say this one correctly, Enderle in Moll, the Muller Thurgau. So what they did with this wine was, it's a really great expression of Muller Thurgau. It normally is very floral. So if you have it in front of you, I definitely get things like rose petals on it. And it still has like lemon, but it's a very stark contrast from the Riesling that we just tried, moving into something that is this aromatic. Riesling can be, but it's also a stylistic difference. Like that's a really crisp, clean, like fresh, just out of harvest almost Riesling, versus this Muller has, I think it's like 4 to 8 days of skin contact. So it has some of that florality to it, but then if you also try it, it has a significant amount of like phenolic bitterness and some tannin. So even though it doesn't look that orange, I would say that when you're actually tasting it, this is way more what it like an orange wine normally tastes like. It's not stark tannin, it's nice, it's balanced, it's lighter, but it's definitely there. You would not normally find that kind of tannin in a regular Muller Thurgau. It is a bummer that you guys can't see the video. I guess we'll just show them or send them to you guys after. But for the most part, it's really just to see the scenery. Like I would like for you guys to kind of see where these came from, because the landscapes and the backgrounds of all of them are really different, particularly on the next one we're going to talk about. But the background on these guys is they're two friends who had met, I think in college, Enderle and Moll, their last names. And they both had gone off to different parts of the world to make wine. And when they came back to where they were from, they decided that they were both looking to make wines naturally, were really in the same mindset about it. So they started with, I think they started with a few different white grapes, and in the natural wine world, at least, they've become really famous for their orange wines. They make beautiful wines across the board, but it's not as common to find tons of orange wines in Germany, and they really make that style with quite a few different types of varieties. And this one's they're fun and funkiest, like funkiest. It's actually very clean. It's not that funky at all, I would say. But like most fun label and playful, I guess, of the types of wines that they normally make. And a bit about the region too. So we are doing a regional shift. I didn't actually chat about Pfalz before, but Pfalz is where the Brand brothers are from. Which if we go back to this really quick. So we started up here, or down here, sorry, in Pfalz. Now we are in the Baden region. In the Baden region, if you've ever listened to like Hansel and Gretel, the Black Forest, that's what the Baden region is. And it's actually normally known for its red grapes. You see a lot of like Spätburgunder, Pinot Noir coming out of here. But these guys make a bit of red, but normally more white, and they have these really great, wonderful orange wines there. So very different style. Also the second most produced grape in Germany, which I found funny because we started with the most produced, which is Riesling. Now we've moved into the Muller Thurgau, and a bit of a different style because we're doing the orange wine. Anyone? Oh, and this one was in the 6-bottle club and the 12-bottle club. Does anyone have this wine and have any thoughts about it?
It looks like Susan Knight. I think, Susan, you're referring to this one, that she just paired it with broiled tilapia.
Oh, that would be interesting. Yeah, I think the aromatics from this wine would be really nice with, you say broiled tilapia? That would be a pretty good pairing. All right, now on to some bubbles. Actually, can't drink all these. So next we're going to be looking at a older winemaker who makes very traditional wines, and we've basically picked his least traditional of all of his wines to put in this box, which I found very funny. So he's very famous for Riesling, Stein, in the Mosel, which is one of the most famous wine regions in Germany. But it just turns out that he's one of the only people that does do rosés in the region, and his rosés I've always found to be really characteristic, or actually the opposite, not very characteristic, but beautiful and unlike any other type of like rosé that I've had out of Germany. So when we found this one available, I was really excited to put it in the box. I think it's only in the box because we didn't get a very big allocation of it. So if you have this one, it is a very singular sparkling wine and a really exciting one. So if you've learned anything from the beginning, we have the Spätburgunder to start, which means that the major grape in it is Pinot Noir. Then it has a bit of Cabernet Sauvignon and a bit of Merlot. And I will just play this video, even though you guys don't see or don't hear him, just so you can kind of see the backdrop of where this is from, because something really special about the Mosel is the terraces, and we'll talk a little bit more about terraces in a minute because one of the wines is actually called it. But they actually have to use ladders in some of the places to do their harvest. So you can't even walk down by foot because it is so steep and it's just right on the riverbank that you have to climb down, put your basket on your back, pick the grapes, and climb back up. So yeah, there's a reason that the Mosel is one of the most famous regions in famous regions in Germany for winemaking. Oh, sorry, it stopped because I got a phone call. And that's because it has gorgeous different types of stones. You have slate, you have like everything broken up in a way so that the vines are able to get through it, but it's still able to get the minerality out of it. Oh, now here you can kind of see how steep that is. They're literally having to climb down that to get to these grapes. So while we're just generally watching this, I'll talk a little bit about the wine. It's light, like it doesn't have a lot of extraction, but it's still quite savory on the end. So like the first thing I get on it are strawberries, red berries like cranberries, but then like the finish, it's quite savory, which is why I was struggling. Oh, there's the ladder, which is why I was struggling with deciding which to pair first or put first, because the orange has a light extraction. It doesn't have a lot of tannin, but this one really does end kind of savory. And it's also, the other unique thing about it is that it's aged for a rosé because it's a 2017. And it's not typical to see rosés. It's not typical to see rosés be like drinkable or like as exciting multiple years in. But because he is such a perfectionist in his winemaking, this is one of like the only rosés that I've ever seen. Also, I think because it's sparkling, but one of the only rosés I've seen that is really doing well multiple years in. And I think that's also why it has this really interesting finish to it, because it has had time. Most sparkling rosés don't get a lot of time to age and really like mature. And this one, that's what it feels. So even though it's light extraction, you could still pair it with something a little bit heftier. It's still, and honestly, it still has some life to it. I would say like you could probably still drink this for a few years, which is, again, just when you're talking about rosés, pretty uncommon. Anyone have any thoughts about rosé, sparkling, Stein, the Mosel in general? I'm pretty sure it's the oldest winemaking region in Germany as well, which is also probably why it is very famous. And as you saw from all those stones, like the majority of the wines there have amazing minerality, really great acidity. And because of where a lot of them are located on that riverbank with a hill, that's like, there is no better winemaking condition in the world than to have water in front of you and be on a hill so that you're able to get the sun and have the sun also reflect off of the water, especially in a place like Germany, where we were talking about how it's quite cold. that really allows the grapes to mature better, and is why it's probably the most famous for its winemaking, because that's a beautiful combination. Also, if you have your topper, the best way to store your bubbles is just to keep them tucked in. All right, if people don't have any thoughts about the rosé, we will move on to our first red, which is the Roterfaden and Rosswag Terraces. So continuing to talk about terraces, we're now in Württemberg. I did actually live in Germany for 4 months, so I don't speak it very well or at all, but I do at least know a few ways to say where things are from. So in this region, this is Rosswag in general is not normally on the map, but the Roterfaden family is actually the 1% that does have a named winemaking company in the region. So what they did for this bottle is they worked with the local co-op of Rosswag. So Roterfaden are the people that made it. Rosswag is the little town and the co-op in that little town that they used the grapes from to make it. And what they do is they basically just each year go out and they make a white version and a red version of what's available. So you'll see in here that there's several different types of grapes as a mix. So there's the Lemberger, Trollinger, Regent, and Riesling. And Lemberger is, or Lemberger or Trollinger. One of them is actually Blaufränkisch, but the way to say it in, with the way they pronounce it, or sorry, the way that they actually call it in Germany is Lemberger. Stephen, Danielle, you might have to correct me on that one. I don't remember which one it is, but it's in this one and the next wine as well. So it's interesting because this wine and the next wine that we'll try have a few of the same grapes in them. They're repeated, but the two wines really could not be more different. They're both fairly light because they don't have a lot of extraction on them, but they have very different noses, and one has a lot more blackberries to it versus this one. This one's a lot smoother. Like it has, I would say, like vanilla in it. It is a bit smoky, does have savoriness, but you'll see if you do have both of them. This one I believe is in our 6 club and our 12 club. So if you do have this one, you can try it now. And I would say that you normally get the smokiness and that savoriness. You get it a little bit on the nose, but not quite as much on the palate. And out of all these wines, when I was trying them earlier, this one is definitely the biggest price performer because they obviously are working with their local co-op, so they're able to have access to a lot of grapes, but they're still doing everything, organically and, making them by hand. And it is really punching above its weight for how much finesse it has. Like as far as natural wines go, like a lot of times when you're getting below like the $25 price point, it's really tough to find ones that have what you would call in like nerdy som speak, like tertiary qualities, or things that come not just from like fruit or from like floral and aromatics, but like actually having things like the baking spices or vanilla. And I don't believe they have any oak on this because it says it's unoaked, but it does have this really like smoothness that would normally, and roundness that would normally come from something else being imparted on it. So I'm really impressed with the way that they've made this. They are a young couple, just like the next winemakers that we'll look at as well. So they basically have been putting this town on the map. And I think that it's really great that they're using natural wine to kind of elevate the, I don't want to say status, but elevate like the name of this town and of the winemaking in their region. So I don't know if you guys have the Terraces. If you don't, I would definitely recommend, I think we have a good allocation of this one, so I would definitely recommend buying this one and trying it, because as far as sharing it with your friends and family, you won't feel bad if you get several bottles, and it just would pair with a lot of great foods that I would like to be eating right now without feeling too hefty, because it doesn't have that oak on it. It's light in alcohol. I think it's 13%. So it's a really good one for like dinner parties with your friends and family. Anyone have any thoughts on the Terraces? Oh, and I did mention earlier we were going to talk about Terraces again. So just like what you saw in that last video, I don't think that it's to the same level of the Terraces. I believe where they're from, they don't have to use a ladder. They rather just have little stairways where they go down. But again, like everything's by hand. There's no machines used here. They're working it themselves. And I think at least they can get a tractor down to put the baskets on where they're from, but it's still quite steep terraces there. All right, so our final wine is going to be this one I really actually can't say very well. Frei, Korper, Kultur. Someone correct me if they actually speak German, but something like that. And I love these producers. This is Bianca and Daniel Schmitt. And we recently did some work with them for our Wonder Woman of Wine cooperation, because Bianca makes some wonderful wines. And I was really excited when we were able to feature it on here as well, because they're doing some really great stuff in the Rheinhessen. So again, going back to, let's just look back at the map before we dive too far in. So we started in the Pfalz, then we went down to the Baden region, then we came up here to the Mosel. And again, just thinking back onto the Mosel for a moment, so that region looks fairly big, but then when we look at the actual amount of wine they're producing, it's interesting to see the difference in that and the variation in that. But then also, if you think about, we don't have a map where we can see how flat or terraced it is, but it is very difficult to grow tons of grapes in the Mosel because of the way that it is structured. So now we know that, and then now we're in the then we went to Württemberg. So you can see down here, that's where we were with Terraces, the red wine. And now we're going to go back into the Rheinhessen, which again is not the largest area, but it's interesting because it is making the most amount of wine. And it is generally a little bit flatter than other regions and has been known for bulk wine. But now we're going to debunk that, because it does have bulk wine there, but it also have some really great wines of quality coming out of the Rheinhessen. All right, so Bianca and Daniel, they work in the Rheinhessen on his family's vineyards. So his family's been making wine under the Schmitt name for a while. She is actually from Hungary, and they met somewhere making wine, I think either in Germany or somewhere else in Europe. And after they got together, they came back up to Germany and took over their parents' vineyard. Also, if you have the bottle and the artwork on it is just really hilarious. I don't want to read into it because I don't know what the exact meaning of it is, but it looks like some Romeo and Juliet type thing on here, where there's fighting across two different vineyards, and Bianca and Daniel in the middle become besties and fall in love. So also, really fun thing about this thing, we have 2 different liter bottles here. So if you're like me, I hope you have other people at home to share these with, because this is 5 bottles and a lot of wine. But I love the fact that they take a wine that is like really quite refined, honestly. Like it's still fun. It's light-ish, as light as you'll see for the style of wine, and easy drinking as far as the body goes. But to put something like this of this quality in a liter bottle really surprised me. And they do it for a red, white, and a rosé each year. And they just have really an amazing lineup of wines. They're also very experimental, like the Brand Brothers. And this is one that we put into our 3-bottle club because I really thought that it was a good representation of one of their nicer wines that still also was like fun value basically to have towards the end of the year when you may have company over and need a little bit more wine than usual. So actually drinking it, it's a really big blend. So you'll see that both of these have been blended red wines. And this one has the Merlot in it, Sec Laurent, Portugieser, Lemberger, and Schwarzburgunder. And if you do have it in front of you, there's one very big quality that you'll probably notice about it that like the blackberries just kind of slap me in the face whenever I first smell it. And it's a really deep wine. It's deep. It seems like when you smell it that it's going to be really hefty. Like I almost prepare myself to be like, okay, this is going to be like potential Tannenbaum. Like I need to get something really hearty to go with it. And it could go with something hearty, but because they're not oaking it, and I don't think it has a ton of extraction, it surprises you on the palate. So if you do have it, you can try it. So what starts off as really big and bold actually mellows out a lot on the palate, and it still tastes delicious. It has a ton of different types of fruits on it. Like you get the blackberries, I get plums, but it goes away. Like I would not put this with like a stew. You could, but it doesn't have like the amount of tannin and sort of like heft. It's pretty medium across the board. It does have a nice umami-ness to it though. Like I would love to put it with things that have maybe like mushrooms in it. And I would also recommend giving it just a slight chill. Also, when I tried this one, I don't know if you're like me, but I always just think like, is this gonna stain my teeth and make my lips super red? Like this is that wine, that one wine where you're like, I only had 4 sips, but for some reason now all of a sudden like my mouth is purple. That's literally exactly what this wine is. So it's interesting comparing this wine to the one we had just before because there are several grapes on it that are the same, and yet the two are like could not be more different other than the fact that they are unoaked and relatively medium bodied. Everything else about their profile is not the same. This one, it's not that it's harsh at all, but the other one is just a lot smoother and has more roundness to it versus this one has heft and it has a lot like the fruit is the star in this one.
And Holly, there's a question. Is it, it was described as unexpected and jammy. And they asked, is it because of the grape blend rather than the extraction?
Yeah, I think the jamminess is definitely coming from like the Blaufränkisch that is in it. Because normally well, I guess there's Blaufränkisch in the other one too, but normally there's like in Blaufränkisch, you're able to get a lot of jamminess in it. And also if it has a bit of tannin, that's when it's like the perfect type of wine to have like a stew or like a winter meal with. It also could be like the Portugieser, like the Blauer Portugieser normally has like a bit of smokiness to it, which I get a hint of that with this one, not a ton, not as much as the other one. But yeah, it definitely could be coming from that. This one also has the Pinot Noir in it, the Schwarzburgunder, while the other one did not. So I think that one also has a bit of a part in it. But again, normally Pinot Noir is pretty light. And here we're really, the first thing we're getting is that blackberry. And then it also, it's nice because it actually has a lot of, like, it's a pretty complex. It's not just one thing. It starts with blackberry and then it kind of goes into the plum. But again, like it's not, you're not getting vanilla on it. You're not getting leather or anything like that. It's really just like a melody of fruits in your mouth versus different types. Violets. I think I would get violets on it too. It has some floral characteristics too, more than the Terraces did. Yeah, and I would also say that both of these reds, like when you think about German reds, for the most part, people picture lighter reds, again, because it comes back to the climate. There are some that aren't light reds, but we do have 2 examples here that are, medium extraction, medium body across the board. And I do think that is what you normally will see from German reds. And I think that that's a really nice type of really nice style of wine to have right now, which was why it was interesting when we were talking to Wines of Germany about doing this now, because in the winter months, it's not always, you don't always first think to go to white wines. But it was fun to kind of look at, like, there's people that want to have white wines all the time, or depending on what you're eating, like something like a liter bottle of Riesling is an amazing thing to have around December, because you're just, if you're hosting people, that's like the perfect wine to open and have with friends. Then we have, light extracted orange wines. Like, orange wines are perfect all season long. And then like the savory rosé, like as far as like sparkling rosés go, this is like the perfect one. If I was to like pick one wine and have it go throughout the entire meal, I would definitely picture something like this working, because you're able to start with the bubbles, which means that it can, go with maybe some appetizers, but then it has that savoriness to it at the end. So you can actually have it with maybe a regular meal, not like a lamb shank or something, but if you're having a pork or a chicken, like that could still work. And then we go into some of these lighter reds that still have quite a bit of, body's not the right word. They have a lot of deep notes to them, which I feel like really says to me this is the winter time. But then they're not super heavy, which is great, because if you're trying to, maybe have a Thanksgiving meal or spend time with family and not get super bogged down with something that's 14+% alcohol, it's nice to have like a lighter finish to it, and be able to share that with your friends. Oh, and this is Bianca and Daniel. I forgot to say that part. So I love their stuff. If you're ever in the Rheinhessen, I think that they're a great example of what you can find there. So that's the general presentation. I would love to chat with you guys if there's anything else you want to know about natural wine generally, natural wine in Germany, the wines in particular. I hope you guys liked them. I was really excited to put them into the December club, and I hope that you guys enjoyed having this type of experience in the club, plus the box, but in the club, because sometimes it's really nice to be able to have a specific theme that can go with it and learn a little bit more than you normally would beyond the cards and what we send you guys about the wine.